If you're here to apply, then remember this: men like you are expected to sweep and keep your head down." The voice was sharp, clipped, and cold, slicing through the sterile air of the glass-paneled lobby like a guillotine. Victor didn't flinch. He simply nodded, adjusted the collar of the worn gray jacket he wore, and stepped aside to let the young manager pass. The man barely glanced at him again, already preoccupied with his earpiece and morning coffee. It was 7:02 a.m. The sun hadn't yet warmed the city of Detroit, and the chill of late autumn clung to the sidewalks like invisible frost. From the outside, the 30-story tower looked like every other tech company's headquarters: gleaming steel, curated greenery, and faceless efficiency. But to Victor, it was something different. It was his legacy. His name, Victor Mason, was etched discreetly on the cornerstone plaque at the back of the building, a name no one had connected to the janitor filling in for the week. Victor had built Mason Technologies with his bare hands and burning purpose, coming up through the grit of West Michigan, pushing back against every door closed in his face. He had risen not just to the top of the company, but into the echelons of American business magazines and boardrooms. Yet, he stood here, holding a mop bucket, unseen. It had started with a letter. No return address, no signature. Just a single paragraph typed on recycled paper. "They treat people like dirt. The higher you go, the less they see us. Do something, or one day, it'll all burn down from inside." Victor had read the letter 6 times. He didn't call for an audit or a meeting with HR. Instead, he packed away his bespoke suits and re-entered his own company incognito, this time from the basement entrance. He'd arranged a favor with the maintenance contractor on week on the ground as a fill-in janitor, a role he hadn't touched since college. He needed to see for himself. And this morning was only the beginning. As he entered the service corridor, the scent of industrial cleaner mingled with the quiet hum of elevators. A few passing employees nodded curtly. Most didn't notice him. He could hear snippets of rushed conversations, deadlines, presentations, who skipped the mandatory meeting, who might be on the chopping block next quarter. It was a language of fear wrapped in professionalism. At 7:15, he reached the lobby corner where the reception desk stood like a lonely island in the sea of glass. She was there just as the schedule had predicted. Rose, mid-30s, curly chestnut hair pulled into a loose bun, glasses slightly fogged from the cold. She had a kind face, not just kind in the way some people smile with their mouth, but in the way she looked you in the eye and saw you. "Good morning," she said brightly, her voice warm and unaffected. "Cold out there today." Victor blinked. It had been years since anyone had looked at him while disguised as invisible labor and greeted him like a fellow human. He nodded. "Frosty," he muttered. She reached into a drawer and handed him a small paper cup. The words, "You matter," were printed in neat block letters with black marker. The coffee was lukewarm, but it may as well have been gold. Victor accepted it silently. "I always make a little extra," Rose said, smiling. "They don't let you use the break room on this floor, right? Rules are rules, but kindness doesn't have a department." He was stunned for a moment, not by the coffee, but by the fact that she knew that people like him were kept out of spaces for comfort, like ghosts expected to clean in silence. "I'm Victor," he said. She arched a brow. "Just Victor? For now, yeah. Well, Victor, welcome to the madness. I'm Rose. If you ever get sick of floor wax and fluorescent lights, come chat. We've got better company than the executive floor, I promise." He chuckled softly. "Thanks for the coffee and the humanity. You'd be surprised how rare those two things are around here," she whispered with a wink. The rest of the day passed in a blur of observations. The VP of sales screamed at an intern for stapling his presentation incorrectly. A middle manager asked a cleaner to wipe his whiteboard while he stood 2 feet away. Not once did anyone say please. Not once did anyone say thank you. Only Rose, again at lunch, handed Victor a muffin wrapped in a napkin and asked if his family was doing okay. He didn't answer. Instead, he watched her return to her desk and quietly help an elderly delivery man who'd been struggling to find the right office. She didn't do it for applause. She didn't even mention it afterward. That night, in his tiny corporate apartment, Victor wrote in a leather-bound journal, "This place has grown shiny on the surface but hollow at its core. Rose is the exception. She is the humanity we lost somewhere along the way." He stared out at the skyline, lit in blue and silver. He'd come looking for rot. What he found, instead, was a light flickering in one woman's small, quiet goodness. He wasn't sure yet what he'd do with that discovery, but tomorrow he'd be back at the same post, mop in hand, watching, listening, and waiting. If you've ever been judged by your uniform or looked down on because of your role, leave a comment below. Like this story if you believe kindness should be company policy, and subscribe. Victor arrived earlier the next morning, the frost on the sidewalk still untouched by commuter boots. His breath clouded the air as he crossed the lobby in silence, the mop handle slung over his shoulder like a soldier's rifle. The building had a different rhythm before the noise of the day settled in. Lights buzzed softly overhead. Elevators clicked into standby. The smell of burnt coffee and over-polished tile floor lingered. At this hour, the building belonged to the unseen. As he passed the reception desk, Rose was already there, jacket draped over the back of her chair, fingers flying across her keyboard. She looked up and smiled when she saw him. "Morning, Victor. You beat me today." "Couldn't sleep," he said. She slid a cup across the counter to him, this one labeled in fresh ink. "Keep going." He nodded in gratitude, the warmth of the paper against his hands more comforting than he expected. "You always this generous to strangers?" She gave a little shrug, never pausing in her typing. "Strangers deserve kindness too, and you don't seem like much of a stranger anymore." He carried the cup down the hallway, thinking about that. Not a stranger, not a janitor, not a CEO. Somewhere in between, he was becoming someone else. The mop and cart were waiting in the utility room, as always, untouched by the world above. He started on the second floor, keeping his movements efficient but quiet. This morning, he wanted to observe more than clean. Every department had its own flavor. Marketing was loud, bright, and full of laughter that didn't quite reach the eyes. Finance was quieter, calculating, guarded. The engineering floor smelled of metal and energy drinks. It was here that Victor overheard the first sharp whisper. "I swear, I saw her give that janitor guy coffee again." "Seriously? Rose needs to learn boundaries. Or find a boyfriend who doesn't carry a mop." A pause, followed by a smirk. "You think she knows he's just another invisible?" Victor kept moving, but the words hung in the air like dust in sunlight. He was invisible here, that was the point. Yet hearing them mock her for seeing him, it stirred something far deeper than offense. Later that morning, he stood near the break room door, pretending to adjust a vent while listening to the conversation inside. Two managers were reviewing staffing for Q1. "We'll need to cut a few more from support. No one notices when the bottom layer crumbles." "What about the reception team?" "Let's start with the night shift. They're basically wallpaper. And Rose? Too popular, but she's soft. Won't fight if we shift her schedule." Victor clenched his jaw. He had wanted to believe the letter was exaggerated, that the poison hadn't seeped so deep, but it was everywhere, in whispers, in memos, in the way no one made eye contact with a man carrying a mop. Back at the lobby, Rose was helping an elderly man with a delivery cart. She smiled, joked gently, even walked him to the elevator to ensure he didn't get lost. Victor watched from a distance, noting how she slowed her steps to match his. That wasn't just politeness, that was respect. Later, as the day slowed, he lingered by her desk. She looked up with a smirk. "You look like a man who's been sweeping more than floors." "I overheard something," he said quietly. "About them changing your shift." Her face shifted, the warmth fading just a bit. "Wouldn't surprise me. They like to remind you who holds the clock." "Why stay?" he asked. "You're smart, kind, you could be anywhere." She looked away for a moment, then back at him. "I've been other places. Places where kindness felt like weakness. At least here, I know the cost of being decent." Victor nodded slowly. "Still, someone should speak up." Rose gave a quiet laugh. "And say what? That being nice should get you promoted? That treating people like people should be the rule, not the exception." She studied him for a long moment. "You talk like someone who hasn't just mopped floors his whole life." He gave her a half smile. "Maybe I've seen more floors than I care to admit." "Well, in that case," she said, pushing a small potted cactus across the counter. "Take this. He's resilient. Like you." He stared at the plant green, prickly, alive despite everything. "Thanks," he said softly. "Name him whatever you want," she added. "But he needs sunlight. Don't hide him in a janitor's closet." That evening, Back in his apartment, Victor placed the cactus on the windowsill beside his journal. He flipped through the pages. Notes about callous meetings, shallow compliments, silent pain, but also pages about Rosehair laughter, her courage, the way she asked if his family was doing okay without ever needing the answer. He wrote, "In a forest of suits, one flower dared to bloom. She is not naive, she is brave." The next day brought rain, and with it, a different kind of tension. Rumors began to ripple someone had been fired, a long-time security guard. Reason, non-compliance. The truth, Victor learned, was that he had spoken up about witnessing harassment during a late shift. Rose had vouched for him, quietly, in an email. HR didn't care. As Victor passed the conference room, he saw her sitting alone, eyes red, typing fiercely. She didn't look up as he walked by. That night, the cactus glowed faintly in the city light, and Victor made a decision. Tomorrow, he wouldn't just listen. He'd begin to act. The rain had not stopped. It beat steadily against the tall glass walls of Mason Technologies like a metronome, marking time with an indifferent rhythm. Victor entered through the back again, soaked from the walk despite his hood, the weight of what he'd seen and heard over the past days, now heavier than the mop in his hands. As he moved through the dim corridors before the official workday began, he passed the security desk where Peter used to sit. It was now empty. The swivel chair turned slightly as if someone had left in a rush. A plastic coffee lid sat abandoned on the counter. Peter had always greeted him with a quiet nod, even when Victor wore $1,000 suits. Now, silence had replaced civility. Victor made his way to the janitor's closet, pulling out the usual gear. But today his mind was elsewhere. He replayed the conversation Rose must have had with HR, the way her face looked after Peter's firing, and the line from her email that someone had forwarded to him anonymously. Integrity without protection is cruelty disguised as compliance. He knew then that Rose was walking a narrow line between duty and dignity, between kindness and consequence. When he reached the lobby, Rose was already there. But today, her smile was different. It was brittle, carefully placed. "Hey," she said, voice quieter than usual. "Rough night?" "He didn't deserve that," Victor said. Rose's hand froze over the keyboard. "No," she said. "He didn't, but no one wants to hear it. I sent that email thinking maybe someone would care. They didn't. They fired the wrong person," Victor muttered. "That's the thing," she replied with a weary laugh. "They always do." Victor leaned on the mop handle. "Tell me something. Why do you keep going? Why not leave?" Rose looked at him, and for a second, her eyes were glassy. "Because if everyone good walks away, what's left?" She stood up and placed another coffee cup on the counter, this time without a label. "I ran out of Sharpie," she said with a small smile. "But it still counts." That cup sat warm in his palm as he moved through the floors. He stopped cleaning and started watching more closely, who spoke with respect, who avoided eye contact, who laughed too loud at cruel jokes. He took mental notes, building a map of power and pressure. Then, near noon, something shifted. An emergency email pinged through every floor. Mandatory audit. Departmental compliance review to begin immediately. Executives to report to Conference Room B. He watched the ripple of discomfort move like a slow wave through the glass offices. People shifted in their seats. Phones buzzed. Files were hastily closed. This wasn't routine. Victor returned to the lobby, where Rose was now being spoken to by a tall man in a suit he recognized from memory. Kenneth Bright, head of operations. One of the original hires, back when Mason Tech had 20 employees and a basement office. Now, Bright's voice was tight, clipped, filled with something between threat and bureaucracy. "I understand you've been expressing concerns about protocol," Bright said. "Har's looking into it." "I didn't file a complaint," Rose replied evenly. "I answered questions I was asked." "Nonetheless," Bright said, "I'd recommend you keep future opinions to yourself, for your own trajectory." Victor stepped forward before he could stop himself. "Excuse me, sir," he said. "Is there a problem?" Bright glanced at him, clearly confused by the interruption. "I'm sorry. This doesn't concern cleaning staff." "She was helping a fellow employee," Victor said calmly but with weight. "Isn't that encouraged?" Bright narrowed his eyes. "Do you even work here full-time?" "For now," Victor said, holding the man's gaze. Rose's eyes shifted quickly from Bright to Victor, her expression unreadable. Bright stepped back, adjusting his jacket. "Just be careful who you align yourself with," he said before walking off toward the elevator. There was a silence between them after he left. Victor looked at Rose. "You okay?" "You just put a target on your back," she said. "Might be worth it," he replied. She gave a small, sad smile. "Thanks, Victor. Not many people speak up when it's inconvenient." That night, Victor didn't return to the apartment immediately. Instead, he visited the executive parking lot, still in his janitor uniform, where he keyed in a security code he'd had memorized for years. The private elevator took him to the top, floor empty, dim, and cold. His office was exactly as he left it, untouched. He sat in the leather chair behind the desk that bore his name. He looked out at the city, lights blinking through the mist. Then he pulled out his phone and called a number he hadn't used in months. "Elaine," he said, speaking to his coup. "Tell the board we're convening tomorrow. No press, no memos. I want every director in that room by 9 a.m. "You're back?" she asked. "What's going on?" "I've seen enough," he replied. Back in the apartment later, Victor opened his journal. He wrote, "Day 4. The infection isn't the policy. It's the silence that follows it. But there is still light, still one voice, and I will not let it be drowned." He set the cactus beside the lamp, staring at its tiny resilience. Tomorrow, things would start to change. Victor stepped into the lobby before dawn, the hush preceding another relentless day. His heart pounded in rhythm with healed footsteps from the executive wing. He was no longer merely the silent observer. Today, he would stand at the intersection of power and conscience. From his vantage by the janitorial closet, he watched employees trickle in. Most passed barely a glance, still weighed down by conditioned indifference. Their eyes skipped over him like he was wallpaper. But then he saw Rose, with her stack of paperwork and a posture that betrayed fatigue yet remained poised. She glanced at him, a brief flicker of solidarity between them, before greeting the day's first visitor. Victor had notified Elaine and the board in advance. The mandatory meeting was scheduled at 9 a.m. in conference room A. Rumors swirled that Victor Mason had somehow returned. Some dismissed it as gossip. Others feared the unknown. Today would tip the scales. He began his rounds, cleaning floors quietly, ears attuned to conversations. Marketing laughed at jokes that mocked lower-level staff. Finance quietly spread rumors about replacement waves after holiday season. Near noon, he heard the hushed hiss of management huddling. "We can't let Mason ruin everything," one voice said. "He's going to play the martyr in that boardroom." Victor paused mid-wipe, carefully bending down and continuing as though nothing had happened. By 2:30 p.m., the building felt brittle. The executive elevators were reserved. Employees nervously checked their email. Rose stood at her desk, lips compressed, staring at her screen. Victor watched her, mind racing with how to tip the scales toward justice without exposing his identity prematurely. He considered stepping in, but hesitated. He needed all evidence at his disposal, all voices heard. At 3 p.m., he slipped away to retrieve his phony and untraceable burner, then hurried to a cramped security office just off the lobby. The office door creaked under his touch. Inside, he found security footage monitors and file folders. He connected his phone to the screen, scrolling through hours of footage from the past days. He captured clips. The moment Rose handed him a muffin, the minute she defended a colleague, the instant she hesitated before logging her report. He copied the clips to the burner and slipped it in his pocket. By 4 p.m., Victor was back in the lobby. Rose was crouched near a potted plant, adjusting soil that had escaped the pot. She looked up. "That cactus isn't going to clean itself," she teased, then froze when she noticed the hard set of his jaw. "Hey," she said quietly. "You okay?" Victor nodded. "I'm ready," he whispered. She placed a small hand on his arm, a gesture he would never forget. "Then let's go." The path to conference room A was a gauntlet of polished floors and anxious glances. Victor walked tall, though dressed in his gray jacket and holding the mop bucket. Rose walked beside him. Some executives whispered his name. Others stared as if seeing a ghost. The receptionist desk was deserted. Everyone had been summoned to the meeting. As he rounded the corner, the double doors slid open and he entered last. The room buzzed with tension. The board, Elaine, Kenneth Bright, and several senior executives were already seated. They looked exhausted and uncertain. Victor stepped forward, "Thank you for coming," he said, voice calm but firm. "I know what you've heard. Let me show you what I've seen." Someone clicked a remote, and the screens around the room came to life. Clips played late-night harassment, muted slurs, Rose's quiet first act of kindness. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Elaine gasped in relief and horror. Kenneth's jaw tensed. Victor pressed on. "This isn't just about one person. It's about whether this company stands for something beyond profit. We've built technology that changes lives, but what's the point if the people within these walls feel unseen, unheard?" He paused, eyes on Rose. She held his gaze for a moment before looking down. He continued, voice thick with conviction. "Rose did nothing wrong. She defended a colleague. She offered kindness. She did her job with integrity, and yet she's been punished." "How is—" Kenneth shifted in his chair. His voice was low but brittle. "Chairman Mason," Victor paused, letting the weight of those words sink before adding, "Call me Victor today. I'm speaking as someone who knows this company from the ground up." Silence fell. "Effective immediately, we will reinstate Mr. Peter, review HR procedures, and launch a cultural respect initiative led by Rose." A few board members scribbled furiously. Elaine puckered her lips in approval. Kenneth clenched his fist, but gave no response. Rose sat rigid, nearly invisible in the hush that followed. Victor continued, "This isn't a public relations stunt. It's a promise. We will fix who we are, not just what we make." He looked around. "Any questions?" Kenneth cleared his throat. "How do we ensure this is lasting? Not just another memo buried in inboxes," Victor smiled. "Because this will come with accountability. Quarterly reports, anonymous surveys, zero tolerance for retaliation. And people will see, respect matters here." The board agreed. Decisions were made, policies drafted, names written down, programs planned. Victor closed the meeting early. On his way out, he stopped by where Rose stood. He caught her eye. She nodded once. He nodded back. No words were necessary. That evening, Victor and Rose left together through the back entrance, unnoticed. Outside, the rain had stopped. A damp glow from streetlights painted reflections on asphalt. Victor handed Rose the burner. "Proof," he said. She took it gently. "Thank you," she whispered. He shook his head. "Number, thank you for reminding me what this place needs." They walked silently, a rhythm between them, minds aligned, purpose shared. At his apartment, Victor placed the burner and files on his desk. Then he picked up the cactus, turning it toward the window where a fresh dawn was rising behind the city's skyline. He scribbled one final line in his journal. "Momentum begins with one voice. Today that voice was hers. Tomorrow it will be ours." Sometimes bravery begins in silence. Sometimes change begins with a shared mop bucket. The morning after the board meeting, the lobby felt different, warmer, almost hopeful. Victor stepped through the doors in his uniform, mop in hand, but beneath it all, he carried a secret confidence. This was no longer about secrecy or observation. Today, the change began. Rose greeted him with a small nod and a fresh cup of coffee, without any message, just kindness unmasked. Employees paused as he passed, some offering subtle smiles, others lingering in silence. Victor noticed it all. The board's decision rippled quickly through the departments. The HR email announcing reinstatement of Peter and the Cultural Respect Initiative, led by Rose, had gone out company-wide. The tone was clear. Respect was no longer optional. Rose, in her gentle way, was already implementing small shifts. She rearranged the lobby seating so custodial staff could sit with other employees. She organized a meet-and-greet coffee hour mid-morning, where all staff janitors, engineers, executives were invited to mingle. Victor watched from a distance as Peter, reinstated and relieved, offered to collect cups and plates after the gathering. Laughter fluttered over his mop bucket, real laughter, not hollow echoes. Later, he found himself shoulder to shoulder with Rose by the refreshment table. She handed him a muffin and said, "See, they showed up." He nodded, feeling that warmth again. "Baby steps," he said quietly. She smiled. "Still, giant steps for this building." They began their rounds. Victor cleaned while Rose greeted everyone by name and maintenance, mailroom clerks, part-time interns. Introductions were being made across lines rarely crossed before. He heard Peter express gratitude in a soft voice to a manager who simply smiled back. It was quiet, but significant. By noon, the shift in energy was tangible. In the engineering bullpen, two senior developers paused their work to thank Rose and Victor for the new initiative. She introduced Victor with a subtle smile. "This is Victor. He's the reason we're all actually talking." Smiles and nods followed. A few even offered to help with some cleaning chores after hours as a gesture. But underneath the optimism, the undertow of resistance remained. Kenneth Bright, though absent at the coffee hour, was a lingering presence in Cornersan unspoken tension. Victor caught glimpses of him in meetings, eyes narrowed whenever policies were mentioned. Rose felt the weight too. Her shoulders stiffened when Kenneth passed near her desk. Victor met her in the lobby later that afternoon, mop bucket parked near the wall. The light filtered through the glass front. "Are you okay?" he asked. She looked tired but determined. "It's a good tired," she said, "but I feel everyone's watching me, and I keep worrying, what if they snap back?" He reached out and squeezed her shoulder. "We won't let them. We start small, but we hold the line." At 3:30 p.m., a meeting was scheduled with HR and department heads to outline the Cultural Respect Initiative rollout. Rose led the meeting, standing tall though her voice wavered at first. She laid out anonymous survey plans, quarterly training, and a clear hotline for reporting disrespect. Victor sat in the back, mop bucket beside him, witnessing her strength. One by one, department heads spoke. Some were tentative, others robustly supportive. A finance manager admitted, "I didn't realize how much I ignored people until I thought about it." An engineer added, "I'll volunteer to help with the onboarding sessions." Victor heard in her voice what he had once imagined for the company's culture and openness, a willingness to grow. After the meeting, Rose looked shaky. Victor followed her down the hallway. She stopped near the janitor's closet. "Thank you," she said. "I don't know if I could do that again alone." He smiled with quiet pride. "You're not alone." He handed her his mop bucket like a handshake between equals. "Welcome to leadership." Evening crept in as they finished closing up. Victor escorted Rose to the back entrance. The city lights glimmered outside. They paused. Rose held the cactus in her hand. She had watered it during the day. "It's grown," she said softly. Victor looked at the plant and back at her, "Just like this place." Before she stepped out, she turned to him. "Victor," she said hesitantly, "what happens next?" He paused. "Next, we make sure this sticks. Policies are words, people are actions, and kindness, it's contagious." Rose nodded, her eyes bright. "I'll hold them accountable." He smiled. "That's my cue." Victor watched her leave into the night. He turned and re-entered the lobby just one last time, turning off lights and locking doors. His reflection in the glass showed a man in a janitor's uniform who had jump-started something bigger than a company memo, something human. He set the cactus on the windowsill near the elevator and whispered to no one in particular, "We've begun, and I'll be back tomorrow." And, in his apartment, he wrote in his journal, Day 12. It takes more courage to sustain change than to initiate it. But with the right person leading the charge, anything is possible. He shut the leather book and leaned back, a soft hope lighting his chest. Change was no longer just a mission, it was real. And it started with Rose. Victor arrived before sunrise, the lobby once again holding its breath. Rain overnight had given way to a gray sky, and puddles reflected broken light across the sidewalk. He leaned on his mop for a moment, watching early arrivers. Small gestures were already changing the atmosphere. A nod here, a polite, "Good morning there," but, beneath the surface, tensions lingered. He spotted Rose approaching with confidence and purpose, clipboard in hand. She met him with a determined smile. "Today's schedule is packed," she said. "Department surveys, follow-up with HR, and we've got a surprise visit from board members this afternoon." Victor nodded. "Let's get started." They walked together down the long corridor toward the meeting rooms. The halls felt different now, less stale, more cautious energy buzzing at the edges. Victor paused at the janitor's closet. He left mop and bucket inside. "I'll circle back later," he said. Rose replied, "We'll need you in the afternoon." He squeezed her hand reassuringly. "Count me in." The first stop was the survey session in Conference Room B, where staff were asked to share honest feedback about workplace culture. Rose facilitated with a calm but assertive tone, adapting to each comment with empathy. Victor sat quietly in the back, observing reactions. Most were hesitant at first, but warmed. As anonymity encouraged honesty, the intern spoke about feeling invisible. A security guard lamented disrespect for long-term employees. A senior engineer admitted, "I mocked the janitor's accent once. I saw him struggle, but I laughed." He paused, eyes wet. "I regret it." Applause followed. Victor's chest tightened. Later, HR brought Rose and Victor into a side office. They revealed that several sensitive emails had been forwarded to senior leadership feedback that wasn't anonymous. "We need to protect your identity," HR cautioned Rose. Victor's jaw tightened. "I agreed to this to foster change, not spotlight individuals." Rose replied, "I'm ready to stand for this." HR nodded, promising to anonymize future responses and reinforce anti-retaliation policies. After that, Rose and Victor walked to a small cafe across the street for a quick lunch. She ordered black coffee and a turkey sandwich. He had rice and beans with water. She looked across at him, fatigue visible. "How do you do this every day?" She smiled slightly. "I just remind myself what I'm fighting for." He nodded in admiration. "It's not easy." "Never has been," she said quietly. Back at the building, board members arrived unannounced for the afternoon tour. Rose led the way through the hallways. Victor fell in line behind her. Employees greeted them with respectful nods but rigid expressions, professional, but tense. They paused at reception, where Rose introduced a small, framed photo of the cactus she and Victor kept on the desk. "This little guy is a reminder of resilience," she said. Victor caught the eyes of the board. A flicker of approval passed between them. The tour progressed. They showed them the new mixed seating area, the break room where janitorial and administrative staff could eat together. They passed a bulletin board plastered with positive comments collected from the morning's survey. Victor watched the board members whisper among themselves. One of them, an older white woman in conservative dress, touched the board gently and said, "This is the kind of environment any company should want." Victor felt a pang of hope. But in the engineering wing, Kenneth Bright appeared suddenly. His face was stern. Without exchanging pleasantries, he grabbed Victor's arm. "We need to talk." He led Victor into an empty meeting room, closing the door. "This charade ends now," Kenneth hissed. "You're destabilizing everything. The board is giving me 30 days to reverse this. They think you're being overzealous." Victor remained calm. "The board is supportive. They've seen the truth." Kenneth's grip tightened. "This company owes me loyalty. You're threatening my legacy." Victor met his gaze evenly. "The only legacy that matters is the one we leave on people, not profit margins." A heavy silence followed. Victor left with dignity. Rose was waiting outside. He opened his hand. He held the burner drive. She took it. He said quietly, "We've got everything we need." That evening, Victor stayed late, checking footage and compiling evidence memos, audio snippets, staff testimonials. He typed up a proposed policy document titled Respect and Accountability, ready for the board meeting he'd scheduled for next week. He paused and reread Rose's earlier line in the burner. "Integrity without protection is cruelty disguised as compliance." He added it to the document as a key principle. At midnight, he placed the folder on Rose's desk. She leaned over, flipping the pages. "This is real," she whispered. "You created this." Victor smiled tiredly. "You inspired it." They locked eyes, and for a moment the weight lifted. "We'll finish this," she said firmly. "Together." He nodded. "Tomorrow." He turned out the lights and walked home under street lamps shimmering with drizzle. In his apartment, he studied the night sky from the window. Detroit was quiet, clouded over, but he saw possibilities in the darkness. He wrote in his journal, Day 19, "Building a culture takes more than meetings. It demands courage, reminders, accountability, and there will always be pushing back. We're holding the line." He shut the book. The cactus, now perched by the lamp, cast a small shadow. In it, Victor saw not just a plant, but a movement rooted deeply, growing quietly, ready for sunlight. Victor arrived before dawn again, the lobby shadows stretching long across polished tile. Outside, the air held spring's promise, yet inside, tension still clung to corners like lingering cobwebs. He found Rose at the reception desk, reviewing the respect and accountability policy draft. She looked up and managed a tired smile. "Ready for the board meeting?" Victor nodded. "They'll expect results." Rose rubbed her forehead. They'll expect change, real, measurable change. He poured them both coffee from the staff machine and slid it across. Then that's what we'll deliver. They entered the boardroom just after 9, the same room where he had revealed himself as Victor. Today, the directors assembled around a long mahogany table, papers and tablets arrayed before them. Kenneth Bright sat across the table, his jaw tight, eyes cold. Elaine gave Rose a curt nod in welcome. Victor stood by the projector, adjusting slides outlining the initiative's early metric survey participation at 80%, positive responses growing, reported incidents of disrespect down by nearly half. He glanced at Rose, then at the board. "Good morning," he began. "In the past 3 weeks, we've taken our first steps. We've listened, measured, and acted. Today, we seek your approval to make this permanent." Murmurs rippled. Kenneth cleared his throat. "Victor, these numbers are promising, but they're not flawless. Complaints have gone underground. We've seen no official blowback, but I believe you're pushing a narrative that could. Is it real or just optics?" Victor met his stare steadily. "It is real, Kenneth. If complaints are going underground, that's not disregard its fear of reprisal. Our next step addresses that. We need stronger protections, anonymous channels, and training that frontlines managers must attend. And," Rose stood and added, voice clear, "we propose quarterly anonymous surveys, mandatory respect workshops led by third-party facilitators, and a confidential support system. We want every employee to know they have a voice." She paused, steeling herself. "We also propose monthly accountability reviews. Managers should be evaluated not just on profit, but on how their teams feel." The room grew quiet. One board member, an older gentleman with gentle eyes, spoke first. "This is courageous. It means real change in management style." Another nodded. "I agree. This company must lead by example." Victor watched Kenneth carefully. After several heavy breaths, Kenneth finally spoke. "I support this. But my concern is speed culture doesn't change on a calendar," Victor replied steadily. "We know it's not instant, but measured steps, with consequences for non-compliance, that builds trust." Elaine leaned forward. "Then let's vote." 1. The votes came in 8, for 1 abstain, Kenneth, 0 against. The initiative passed unanimously. Rose inhaled deeply. Victor reached over and squeezed her hand briefly, quiet gesture of solidarity. After the meeting, Kenneth stayed behind. He approached Rose slowly. "Good work," he said, tone cautious. Rose nodded. "Thank you." He then looked at Victor. "You're driving this well. Don't let ambition blind you." Victor acknowledged him. "We won't." Kenneth nodded once and left with a firm stride. Outside the boardroom, employees lingered in the halls, uncertainty tempered with cautious optimism. Victor and Rose stepped into the lobby. A few people nodded their heads. Some offered smiles. One intern approached Rose and said quietly, "Thank you for listening." She responded, "Thank you for trusting us." He beamed before hurrying away. Victor watched her wrapping kindness around confidence. He saw why this mattered. They completed their afternoon with walkthroughs. Departments had set up whiteboards with "Respect Stories" little notes. Jane said thank you after sections. Michael said hello every morning. When I was late, someone covered my desk. Victor paused to read them, the ripple effect clear. He pointed one out to Rose. "These are small, but they count." She nodded. "They're the bricks we lay for culture." Towards evening, Kenneth reappeared, silent but present. He watched as Rose locked down devices, filed documents, turned off lights. Then he stepped forward. "May I?" he asked, indicating the mop and bucket. Rose stepped aside. Kenneth looked at Victor. "You've turned it into a symbol." Victor smiled. "Only because it represents all of us." Kenneth hesitated, then placed his hand on the mop-handly rare moment of unity. Rose watched silently as one department head approached, then another, placing their hands alongside Kenneth's. Dewine. Soon the mop bucket formed an impromptu circle of professionals and custodians. Victor looked at Rose. "We did this." She looked back. "We start from the ground." Later that night, Victor and Rose sat alone in the empty lobby. They shared coffee from their own secret mugs. "We have to keep them honest," Rose said, eyes distant. Victor nodded. "Yes, and we will. But tonight, rest. Then tomorrow we build on this." She smiled softly. "One brick at a time," he agreed. "One brick at a time." Victor returned to his apartment and wrote, Day 25. Change is slow but unstoppable if anchored in kindness. Today, even opposition touched the handle. That's progress. Tomorrow, we reinforce, not relent. He shut his notebook, feeling steady determination in his chest. Progress, he knew, meant patience and kindness, edged with accountability, would be their compass. Victor arrived to work at the same early hour, guided by familiarity and purpose. He paused at the lobby entrance and inhaled deeply, noticing how the atmosphere had changed, less tension in the air, more openness in the spaces between people. As he set down his mop bucket, Rose appeared beside him with 2 steaming mugs. "Coffee ritual continues," she said with a soft grin. He accepted the mug and nodded. "Morning, partner." She tucked her clipboard under her arm. "Big day today," she added. "First training session with the managers." Victor took a sip, feeling the warmth spread through him. "Then let's give it everything." The first training session took place in the largest conference room, where chairs were arranged in a broad semicircle. Rose led the session, introducing a facilitator from an outside organization, the kind of professional who'd never shy from calling out unconscious bias. Victor watched as managers trickled in from various departments. A few paused by the mop bucket and stared awkwardly, an image of humility meeting hierarchy. One finance director cleared his throat and took a seat. Kenneth Bright leaned against the wall, arms crossed. Victor sipped his coffee, unmoved but alert. Rose began by reading a quote, "Respect is not earned by title, but by how you treat someone when no one is watching." She paused, letting it sink in, then handed the floor to the facilitator, who guided exercises on empathy role-playing scenarios where executives experienced what it felt like when their ideas were ignored or their issues dismissed. Victor watched the tension ease visibly. Managers exchanged unguarded glances and some shared uneasy laughter at their own missteps. After an hour, they took a break, and Victor overheard someone say, "I had no idea, thank you for this." He found Kenneth at the coffee station. Kenneth nodded curtly. "Not bad," he said, voice low. Victor gave a thin smile but said nothing. Kenneth looked away with a sigh. "Let's hope this isn't just showing up for a few hours." Victor met his gaze. "Actions are louder than sessions." Kenneth nodded once before turning back to the coffee pot. After training, Victor and Rose walked through the floors to check reactions. On the marketing floor, a manager thanked Rose loudly. "That exercise opened my eyes." A security guard stopped Victor to shake his hand for bringing the change. In the mailroom, a clerk approached Rose. "Thanks for asking how I'm doing really this time." Rose smiled warmly, giving him a small notebook. "It's your turn to record what matters," she said. Each interaction piled upon the small acts of the past weeks, forming a mosaic of real change. The afternoon drew Victor back to the boardroom. He met Elaine and a few directors assembling for a revision meeting time to assess next steps. Papers were prepared, feedback from the training, early warning signs, manager sign-ups, suggested follow-up programs. Victor took his seat next to Rose. Elaine looked at him. This training was well received. Directors are discussing quarterly behavioral reviews now. Victor nodded. Rose handed over her summary. Participation above 90% across departments, and anecdotal improvements in tone and openness. One director said, "My team actually reported to me first time in years." Victor felt hope stirring stronger. As the meeting ended, Kenneth remained behind again. He approached Victor, slightly unsteady. "I heard people talking," he said quietly. "They're changing. I'll admit I underestimated use." Victor considered his words carefully. "We're just giving people tools and space to be better," Kenneth exhaled. "Then let's see how it holds. No more optics. If someone falls back, I'll be the one cleaning it up." Victor smiled. "That's the point." They walked down the hall together toward the lobby, passing Rose, who was arranging the cactus and a new framed photo of the first coffee session. Kenneth paused to read the inscription. "Kindness grows when rooted in respect." He nodded in approval and offered a rare half-smile. Rose looked up and met his gaze. Kenneth nodded toward her. "Good job." She dared a small smile. Victor stepped forward. "Team." He placed his hand over hers, then Kenneth's. The three stood in an unspoken unity: Janitor, Receptionist, operations head-linked by shared conviction. Victor left before evening, heading to the executive floor for the final time while still in uniform, mop in hand. He slipped out of the corporate elevator and entered his old office. He sat behind the desk and stared at the city lights. This time, the silence felt peaceful. He picked up the framed cactus photo and placed it on the desk, along with Rose's notebook summarizing the day. He typed a quick memo. Sunday reflection. Culture must be tended daily. One training is not a cure. We plant seeds now and water consistently. He hit send to Elaine and closed his laptop. When he returned to the lobby later that night, Rose was locking the doors. The building felt emptier now, but alive with possibility. She placed her hand on the mop bucket. Feels right, she said quietly. Victor nodded. Feels like what it's supposed to feel like. He paused, looking around. Tomorrow we begin the monthly reviews. Rose smiled with tired determination. One session at a time, and more bricks. He looked at her, admiration soft in his gaze. One brick at a time. Back in his apartment, Victor began writing in his journal. Day 32. Real change is slow, but today I saw walls crack. Managers spoke from their hearts. Steve from finance apologized to the mail team. Anna from marketing admitted bias. Respect doesn't start at love it, starts at humility. He paused and added another thought. If change were a building, today we laid the foundation. He closed the journal and gazed at the city skyline, feeling the first real glow of tomorrow. Victor arrived before dawn, the lobby lights casting long shadows across the now familiar tile floor. The air carried a weight no longer of fear, but of promise. He found Rose adjusting the cactus, its leaves reaching for the light through the glass facade. She offered him coffee in silence ritual ingrained, and he accepted with a nod. Ready for the first monthly accountability review? She asked. As ready as I'll ever be, he replied, scanning the calm but expectant faces of the small group gathering around the mop bucket. They convened in conference room C, where chairs formed a loose circle. Present were department heads, HR, Kenneth Bright, and Elaine. Rose took the lead. This meeting is about reflection, progress, and course correction. She paused and met each eye. We start with data. She passed out sheets showing trends from the surveys and training feedback. Most numbers were moving in the right direction. Increased respect scores, more peer recognition, fewer late-night complaint emails. But a few areas lagged. Customer support and finance had seen stagnation, if not subtle declines in positive sentiment. Rose handed the floor to Victor. Dressed as always in his janitor uniform, he spoke without grandstanding. Change happens in fits and starts. The fact that some groups lag isn't failure, it's insight. We've learned where to focus next. Kenneth nodded, but his jaw remained tight. Victor continued. Let's hear from those teams. What's working? What's not? A nervous silence followed. Then Stuart, a customer support manager, raised his hand. We tried the empathy workshop, but real respect eludes us when deadlines drop. People revert to old habits. Rose listened. So, what's the barrier? She asked. Stuart exhaled. Time pressure, incentives tied to productivity, respect gets deprioritized. Elaine leaned in. That's valuable feedback, Rose added. We'll adjust shorter modules during off-peak hours, target incentives to include team collaboration and courtesy. Next, a finance team leader spoke. We want to change, but some parts of the chain don't see this as part of their job. It's an add-on, Kenneth interjected. Then we need to make it part of their job. Performance goals tied, not optional. Victor nodded in agreement. What if we include respect and teamwork as measurable KPIs? Quarterly performance tied to review scores. The room considered it. Heads dipped. Finance lead said, that could work better than mandated sessions. The tone warmed. After 90 minutes, courage had been steadied by accountability. Rose closed the meeting. This isn't easy, but it's worth it. We support each other. Our culture builds from transparency. Victor added, we'll track action points, share progress next month. They dispersed. Some stayed behind nervously. Others forgave themselves or each other. One intern hesitated to approach Victor. Thank you, she whispered. He smiled. Keep speaking up. We're listening. Back in the lobby, Rose sank into a chair behind the desk. Victor sat beside her. That went surprisingly well, she said. He agreed. Productivity-driven change has teeth. She looked at him thoughtfully. What about you? Are you holding up? He set the mop beside the desk casually. "I'm seeing purpose in every sweep," he replied. She laughed softly, a poet with a mop. They lingered quietly, aware of how far they'd come and how far there remained. At mid-afternoon, Victor conducted a surprise walkthrough. He carried his mop and bucket through finance, marketing, support, and mailroom. He greeted everyone by name. He paused to listen to complaints and praises, taking notes. In support, Stewart thanked him. "Your presence matters," Victor replied. "And your voice still matters more." He nodded sincerely as he moved on. In the lobby, he encountered Kenneth. Kenneth offered him a nod and said quietly, "I updated my calendar-added respect KPI reminders." Victor raised his eyebrows with surprise and satisfaction. "Progress," he said simply. Kenneth nodded. "It's time." That evening, Rose and Victor stayed late, rearranging the Respect Stories board, adding new notes from the day's review. Among them, "We apologize today. We listened, then acted." A finance intern posted, "I saw my manager admit a mistake." Victor stepped back to read. He looked at Rose. "These bricks, they're stacking faster." She smiled with exhaustion and pride. "Yes." As they locked the doors, Rose asked, "What's next month's focus?" Victor thought. "Find resilience in resistance. We'll support teams facing real pressure." She nodded. "We can share success stories along with challenges." He locked an eye on her. Together, they walked out into the dusk, mop wheels echoing down the hallway, symbolic of change in motion. In his apartment, Victor opened his journal. Day 40. Accountability isn't a moment. It's a habit. Today we reinforced momentum and witnessed leaders lean in. Tomorrow we dig deeper into pressure, conflict, and resilience. The foundation is strong enough to build on. He closed his journal, extinguished the lamp, and let the city's distant hum ease him into rest. In every sweep of his mop and every shared glance with Rose, he felt growth not just in culture, but in hearts. Victor entered the lobby before sunrise as usual, mop slung across his shoulder, but the mood this morning felt different. The halls bore a quiet expectancy, as though the walls themselves were waiting to see what would unfold. He paused at the reception desk where Rose stood arranging folders, her expression focused. She turned when she saw him, offering a small, tired smile. He returned it. "Ready?" he asked. "Always," she replied. They shared a brief nod before he headed toward the janitor's closet, but paused when she placed a hand on his arm. "Last week we saw momentum. Today, we meet resistance again." He squeezed her hand. "Then we show them why we began." They started with a surprise walkthrough of the customer support area. Sweat still fresh on Stewart's brow, the team greeted them with quiet relief, but also evident stress. Victor set down the mop and stepped forward quietly. "How's morning been?" he asked Stewart. "Hectic," Stewart admitted, rubbing his temples. "We're understaffed again, fewer breaks, and half the team still feels they're not heard in meetings." Rose folded her arms thoughtfully. "Then let's schedule listening sessions today. Every voice matters." Stewart's face softened. That would help. They moved on, leaving behind a team watching them with cautious hope. By mid-morning, Victor joined Rose in a meeting with department heads to propose the new policy. Listening sessions at quieter hours, rotation of responsibility for leading meetings, recognition of empathy and performance reviews. Kenneth nodded slowly as they presented, but several finance and support leaders exchanged uncertain glances. A junior support rep spoke up. "Will this really change my day, today, or just another promise?" Victor met him squarely. "It will change if we hold it accountable. We'll check in weekly and report transparently." The junior rep nodded, half relieved but wary. The proposal passed unanimously, but a flicker of hesitation lingered in the air. At noon, Victor and Rose attended their scheduled monthly leadership briefing. Elaine introduced a surprise guest, an external consultant specializing in organizational psychology. "We're here to help measure the unseen trust, respect, cooperation," the consultant said. He explained a new set of behavioral indicators show. Often employees spoke up in meetings, whether managers thanked their teams, how quickly feedback was acknowledged. The room buzzed. Kenneth leaned forward, clearly intrigued. Afterward, Rose and Victor walked through the employee lounge. They found a small group playing ping pong. One of them, an engineer named Maria, paused mid-serve and smiled. "Thanks for making this space feel ours again." Victor smiled, tapped the table gently. Keep playing." As they walked away, he turned to Rose. "These small moments, they matter." She nodded and glanced back at the players. "They do." That afternoon, in a quiet corner of the lobby, Rose found Victor copying memos from the consultant. She sat beside him. "They're impressed," she said softly. "The board asked for progress metrics next quarter." Victor sighed. "Pressure is good if accompanied by authenticity." She watched him. "And you? Are you feeling pressure?" He paused. "More than ever." She leaned in. "You don't have to carry it alone." He met her eyes. "I don't." She smiled with relief and leaned her head briefly on his shoulder. Later, Victor attended a late afternoon session with the finance team struggling to embrace the changes. The CFO led the meeting, looking tense. Victor observed as a manager apologized to his team for ignoring their well-being in previous quarters. A shift. It felt fragile but real. After the meeting, the CFO approached Victor. "Thanks for showing up," she said. It sent a message. He nodded. "Culture is built from the top down but sustained from the heart." She smiled. Evening arrived with a storm brewing outside. Victor and Rose stayed late to finalize materials for the next board meeting charts. Quotes, employee stories. Rose handed him a page with a quote from the junior support rep. "Today, someone asked me what I thought in a meeting." Victor read it and placed it carefully by the cactus. "That's worth more than any sales number," he said. She touched his arm. "We're building something." They locked up together. Outside, rain hammered on the glass as they stepped into the night. Rose tucked the cactus under her arm. Victor glanced at her, concern and pride mixing in his eyes. "Come back tomorrow?" he asked. She nodded. "We leave nothing unfinished." He held open the door. "Good night, Victor." She smiled. "Good night." He watched her walk away before returning, mop in hand, to lock the door behind him. Back in his apartment, Victor wrote in his journal, Day 45. Today was a crucible when resistance met resolve. We held firm. We stood together. Perhaps the real test isn't starting change, but sustaining it. But in the voices we heard, and in the apologies we saw, it is already bearing fruit. He closed the notebook, the room quiet but alive with purpose. He looked out at Detroit's storm-washed streets and whispered, "We endure." Victor slid into the lobby before dawn, mop in hand, but he paused, staring at the empty bulletin board labeled, Respect Stories. The board had become a mirror of the company's heart, filled with notes of gratitude, simple kindnesses, confessions of past missteps. Yet tonight, all was blank. He frowned. Rose appeared from around the corner, her expression tight. "They cleared it," she said. "HR said it was too personal, overly emotional. They're putting up generic messages instead." Victor felt a deep ache settle in his chest. They're erasing the humanity. Rose stepped beside him. "I confronted them. HR's worried it's unprofessional." He looked at her, pain and pride mingling in his eyes. "Then it's time for a reckoning." Their first meeting of the morning was with HR and department heads. Rose and Victor presented a plan to restore the board and keep it frontline-led. "Respect culture isn't sterile," Rose said. "It's emotional, personal. That board reflects real people being seen." Or hesitated. "We need to maintain corporate tone." Victor leaned forward, voice steady. "Corporate tone doesn't require erasure of personhood. It requires empathy. These are our people." The room shifted. HR glanced at each department head. One marketing lead finally spoke. "I want to post my note again. Let employees see we care," others murmured agreement. The board was restored by noon, filled again with colorful stories. With momentum regained, Rose and Victor walked through finance. They found Kenneth overseeing a small group gathered around the board. He tapped a note pinned at eye level. "When my deadline was impossible, my team rallied around me instead of pushing blame." He looked at the note and nodded. Victor cleared his throat. Kenneth turned. "That changed me," he said quietly. Victor nodded. "That's why it matters." Kenneth offered a stiff, half smile. "Let's keep this board alive." A moment of unity passed and Victor felt the ground shift beneath them. Late morning, the company was abuzz with a rumor. A high-profile customer had canceled a deal due to troubling reports from staff surveys. The board called an immediate all-hands to address it. Victor and Rose stood before the staff in the large training room, mop bucket parked behind them. Elaine opened by acknowledging the deal loss. but we're learning something far more important. Victor stepped forward. We built this company on innovation and integrity. If the world outside sees problems within, that's our signal to fix them, not hide them. Rose added, we owe our staff transparency, and we owe each other accountability. Murmurs of support swept the room. Half an hour later, Victor met privately with senior customer relations leaders. He asked them to implement direct feedback loops with clients, to see where staff behaviors affected relations. A senior manager spoke up. Our internal culture affects external trust. We can't separate them anymore. Victor nodded. Exactly. They agreed to start client, staff joint workshops. Rose would help structure them. That afternoon brought a surprise. Kenneth found Victor and Rose in the lobby, now crowded with employees drawn by curiosity. He carried an envelope. Inside, printed on heavy corporate letterhead, was the canceled deal notice. Also enclosed was a note, "Thank you for honest leadership. This can still be saved." The note was unsigned. Cold clarity washed over Victor. They were at a pivot. Transparency had cost them business, but it also earned respect beyond these walls. Victor and Rose called an emergency board meeting. They laid out the situation. Internal issues had caused reputational damage, but initial actions had begun to restore faith. Elaine listened. Kenneth spoke up, tone sober. "This is the price of integrity." Victor nodded. "Yes, but it's a price we pay before it's forced on us." He proposed a client, staff council, to monitor culture and external relations, a public-facing monthly culture report, and a policy of immediate escalation for any disrespect or misconduct. The board agreed, though some directors looked worried. That evening, Victor walked through the empty building with Rose. They paused by the board. She read aloud a story about a support rep who stayed late to help a panicked intern. "When we erase stories, we erase accountability," Rose said softly. Victor rested his hand on the board. "Today we chose to own our scars," she nodded, "and stay open to healing." Night fell as Victor returned home. In his journal he wrote, "Day 55. Transparency is our toughest trial yet. We lost money, but we gained something more precious. Trust. Trust staff. Trust clients. Trust ourselves. This is the reckoning, not the end." He closed the book and stared at the skyline, knowing the journey would require more courage. But for the first time, he felt ready. Victor entered the lobby just before sunrise, and the building felt different, lighter, even hopeful. The Respect Stories board overflowed with vibrant notes, small acts, heartfelt confessions, expressions of team solidarity. Each message felt like a pulse in the company's renewed heartbeat. Rose stood beside it, watering the cactus with care. She met his eyes and offered him a coffee. He accepted, voice laced with wonder. "This is beautiful." She smiled softly. "It's ours." They walked through the empty lobby toward the janitor's closet, mop bucket in tow, but paused at the door. Victor placed his hand gently atop hers, an unspoken gesture of unity. Outside, early employees flowed in. Custodians, interns, engineers, executives. They greeted one another by name, a sign that respect was no longer an aspiration but a lived reality. Victor watched a security guard smile at a young intern, who returned it with equal warmth. These small moments had changed everything. The morning meeting with the board was the culmination of their 6-week journey. As they entered the room, Rose caught Victor's gaze and nodded. Elaine began. "Today, we review the results of our transparency initiative and external-facing culture report." Rose presented the client, staff council charter, quarterly metrics, anonymous feedback scores showing a steady increase in employee satisfaction and customer trust. She concluded, "We've faced adversity, lost a deal, confronted discomfort, but we responded with honesty and empathy." Applause softly filled the room. Kenneth Bright stood to speak. "I've been skeptical, but I've seen improvements in team performance, retention, and even client satisfaction. Culture isn't a checkbox, it's a force. We're seeing bottom-line gains alongside human gains." Victor nodded in appreciation. Elaine summarized, "We now commit to making this core to our business. The initiative will continue, expand, and be refined by our staff, for our staff." Now, later that day, staff gathered in the lobby for the official launch of the public culture report, framed copies posted beside the Respect Stories board. Employees read the figures and heartfelt notes. A hush of pride and possibility settled over them. Rose took the mic. "This is proof that we are more than what we make. We are how we live in here." Victor then stepped forward. "This change began with a mop and a story, and it continues with every one of you. Thank you for choosing empathy over indifference." He looked out at the group. He thought back to the anonymous letter that sent him undercover. He thought of the staff who mocked him, the bully managers, the pain of being unseen. And he thought of Rose whose small kindness sparked transformation. He spoke his final words. "May this company never forget that its real value lies not in profits, but in people. Let this be our legacy." The crowd erupted into applause. Tears quietly formed in eyes across the room. Rose stood beside Victor, leaning into him as the applause washed over them. That evening, they walked through the corridor hand in hand. They paused by the janitor's closet. Victor opened it and handed Rose a small plaque, engraved with the company's new core value: "Respect lives here." She looked at it, eyes glistening. "We built this," he said. "Together." She smiled and gently touched the plaque. "Together," she echoed. Back in his apartment, Victor wrote the final entry in his journal, Day 62. "We began with a mop and a disguise. We end with open doors, named voices, shared humanity. Tomorrow the work continues, but tonight we celebrate more than success. We celebrate what it means to stand for justice, empathy, and integrity. That's a future I'm proud to lead." He closed the leather-bound book. Detroit's skyline glowed softly as night descended. In the window beside him, the small cactus thrived, a living symbol of resilience rooted in kindness. Victor stared at it with a gentle smile before turning off the light, ready for the promise of tomorrow. This story reminds us that leadership is not about titles or appearances. It's about actions, empathy, and the courage to do what's right, even when it's uncomfortable. Real transformation starts with small acts of kindness and grows when people dare to listen, respect, and stand for justice. No matter your role, your integrity can be the seed of change.